which is what her engagement ring is.
Perfect.
Tying it all together.
It's okay, Dee, don't worry, we're just waiting on you. It's okay. No pressure, just hurry.
Right.
Killing me. Just teasing you.
Answering questions.
I'm just teasing you. Okay. Let's see once Ben is ready. Ben, we good? Okay. So. Good evening and welcome to the July 15th City Council work meeting. I'll begin with roll call. Members Gearbot, Zio, Rice, Lesh, Harmont, and Dylan are here. Mayor Morrow will be late this evening. From staff, we have Treasurer Cole, Clerk Royal, Community Development Director Harrington. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
So moved?
Thank you, Mr. Gearbot. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Rice. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We do not have any council member absences, and we will hold off on the mayor because I believe he will be attending soon. So we'll move on to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time and make a comment on or question to City Council. This public comment period is limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state their name for the record. Are there any public comments in the audience? Not seeing any. Clerk Royal, were there any that were received?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so there are none. We will moving on to our one discussion item, which is downtown design study. And Mr. Harrington, did you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're joined by our guests tonight, Carlisle Wortman Associates, Ben Carlisle, Mike Auerbach, the planning consultant for the city, Jennifer Thomas, last name Morris, I'm sorry, too many Jennifers, from OHM Advisors, as well as Rachel Bush from OHM Advisors.
Thank you all for being here. I'll just ask if you please speak into the microphone.
Yeah, thank you, and good evening. My name is Ben Carlisle, Carlisle Wortman Associates. I unfortunately have not had the pleasure to meet most of you, but our company has worked with this community for a number of years, and so it's a great opportunity for me to be in front of you tonight. I really appreciate it. With me today, is that what I do? I'm not trying to shoot at you, but I'm just trying to, yeah. So with you today, I'm going to present the team that worked on this project. With me is Mike Auerbach from our office, and from OHM is Jennifer Morris and Rachel Bush. We are the team that put this concept plan together. So what we're going to do tonight is present the draft concept plan to you. The idea of a gathering space in your downtown is nothing new. This has been discussed, perhaps over-discussed, in this community for many years, and it was recently even codified and strengthened in your 2023 master plan, which again reaffirmed the idea and need for that community gathering space. What is different this time, though, is the city took it one step further. The city obtained a grant from the MEDC to really start engaging the community in a planning process. So with that grant, the city then hired Carlisle Wortman as well as OHM to lead the facilitation of a community-engaged process to ask for opinions on what a downtown gathering space would be, what the location would be, what type of amenities and facilities would be part of it, et cetera. In addition to that was to present a concept plan, which we'll show tonight, and then finally, based on the concept plan, to present some 3D model and renderings that you can then use to go get grants, seek private donations, and then take it to the next step of concept or of construction plan. I would be remiss, though, if I did not also thank a few other members of the team that were vital to this process, including Mr. Harrington with regards to the Community Development Department, your city manager, Ms. O'Toole, and lastly, Mary from the Saline Main Street. They were an integral part of the team and really assisted a lot in the process. I'd also like to thank the the stakeholder groups. We had 2 different focused stakeholder groups. I believe there were about 16 to 18 total participants, including 2 of your council members. And so they were integral into what you see tonight in front of you. And so all their input is a direct result you will see tonight in front of you. I'm a planner, so we have to talk about processes. Really, we're contractually obligated to talk about process. So we are going to talk a little bit about the process in terms of how we got to the final concept plan for you to look at tonight. But really, the focus and intent of this meeting tonight is to get direct feedback from this group with regards to the concept plan in order for us to take it to the next step. So we're going to go through this presentation, not quickly, but with enough time for you to have a lot of feedback and comments to us at the conclusion. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Auerbach with Carlisle Wortman Associates. So to start off, we're going to give a little overview of how we got to this point today and about the project in general. So why prepare a concept plan? Well, it's an opportunity for you and your constituents to begin discussing and get a little more specific about what exactly it is you'd like this gathering space in your downtown to look like. What sort of activities will take place there? What sort of amenities does it have to include to accommodate those activities? And how it'll look? What materials, buildings, et cetera, will it consist of? And it's often easy to overlook this part of the process, but it actually takes quite a bit of time and discussion to drill down and hopefully build some consensus, or at least identify those priorities of what you're looking for in a gathering space. And one of the benefits of doing so is that it puts you in that much better of a position. So when the opportunity presents itself, either with a funding opportunity or when the ideal property becomes available, that you'll be that much farther ahead to begin the additional legwork of preparing actual construction plans and getting more specific and taking that action when the opportunity comes. So what exactly will you be getting by the end of this process? Well, as Ben mentioned, we'll be preparing both 3D renderings of the gathering space, as well as a site plan, a conceptual site plan, which is a top-down aerial view of what the gathering space will look like. We'll be completing and sharing with you our assessment of the existing location options in the city's downtown, so you can account for those as well in making your final decision about if and when to proceed. And we'll also be giving you some preliminary cost estimates. Through this process, you'll be identifying generally the ideal or preferred amenities and materials that you'd like to include in the gathering space, and that'll help us and you come up with some actual numbers that you can scale to different sites, depending if you pick different locations, but it'll at least give you a starting place to come up with actual cost estimates. And so when we originally proposed this project, we thought of it in 3 major steps. The first was to complete that downtown existing conditions assessment, which we've already done. The second was to hold 2 focus group meetings with elected and appointed officials, as well as downtown business owners, property owners, and members of the community to get their feedback and input about what they felt this gathering space should look like. And with that input and in consultation with staff, we prepared a first draft of a concept plan, which we'll be presenting to you tonight. And so our goals for this evening are to give you a quick overview of what we heard from the focus groups, but most importantly, share the layout plan with you and get your feedback on what your priorities are for programming, structures, amenities, design, appearance of the gathering space, and what you would like to see happen next in terms of this completing this project. So a lot of what we're talking about are costs and benefits, but we felt it's important to review what exactly are some of the benefits of a downtown gathering space. And among them are many. First, it's a literal physical space that that is a place where people can meet and where chance encounters can happen. It's easy to overlook that aspect of what makes a downtown, but when those certain places are missing from a particular area, it is noticeable. It also creates a more lively atmosphere by providing that venue for people to meet and spend time in public places. It encourages people to be out and about in the public, and just seeing other people around is a part of what makes a lively, vibrant downtown just that. It's also, of course, a venue for your farmers markets and events, and it helps make your community distinct, which has potential economic benefits. When you think of downtowns in other cities, you can tell when a downtown has its own unique identity and when visiting the place itself is an experience. And that can offer benefits to businesses located in the area by attracting potential visitors and customers. It also, of course, enhances the aesthetic by incorporating art, complementary architecture and green space. It, again, contributes to the overall appearance and that atmosphere in your downtown. And lastly, it's an opportunity to provide more green space. So how did we get to this discussion today? Well, as some of you may know, the city's been talking about the idea of a gathering space in the downtown for some time, and at least a few decades. And the vision for a gathering space was last articulated in a 2007 downtown design plan that had selected what's now and what was then Lot 4, the West Henry lot, as a site for a potential farmers market gazebo, as well as a plaza or open space in the downtown. Moving forward to this past year, as part of the master plan update, that update process included a survey where, among other topics, the city asked residents, business owners, to share their feedback about whether or not they supported a gathering space in the downtown. And of the roughly 370 respondents, there was a vast majority of showed support for some kind of public gathering space or green space in the city's downtown. And so based on that input, the goal of completing this evaluation that we're in the midst of today was included in the master plan. So to start with the existing conditions, what options are available as of today for a gathering space in the downtown? Well, as you all know, the city-owned properties in the downtown consist of 6 separate parking lots. We know that parking is a concern, and it's going to be one of the factors that you'll need to look at when you're evaluating the costs and benefits of providing a gathering space in the downtown, especially at one of these existing sites. And so at the very least, you do have some information that'll hopefully help you make that evaluation. A parking inventory was completed in March of this past year. That also provided some observations about how parking spaces are being utilized. So we're not necessarily going to delve into that today, but the good news is that information is available to you so you can consider that in eventually making a final decision. And so with parking aside, we considered 4 major criteria when evaluating the currently available location options. The first was the dimensions and physical features. The next was pedestrian linkages, or just sidewalk connectivity and accessibility. The next were encumbrances, any legal restrictions that could limit what the city could do with the property, and activation potential. Is it open, visible, and could it be integrated into some kind of a greater, the downtown? The sense of the downtown is a sense of place. And so in short, in our assessment, the City Hall lot and Lot 5 are too far from the downtown center to really be able to be activated in the sort of way that you would want it to be. Lot 3 is needed, as we're told, for water tower access, so that limits the use of that site. Lot 1 is relatively narrow and disconnected, being in between the backs of 2 buildings on either side. Lot 2 is heavily encumbered, and so using that property for anything other than parking, would be challenging, which leaves a Lot 4 as still being what seems to be the most viable location as of now for a gathering space. So with that evaluation done, we used Lot 4 as the basis for these conceptual discussions that we had with the focus groups. And we held 2 focus group meetings in March of this year with, as I mentioned, a mix of elected and appointed officials, downtown business owners, property owners, and members of the community. We started off by sharing examples of gathering spaces in other similarly sized communities, and then asked for their input about how they envision this gathering space to be used, what structures and amenities it should have, and what their design preferences were. And between both groups, we felt the overall consensus seemed to be that they wanted it to be a central gathering space with seating area and the provided shade. It needed to be an attractive destination that would be appealing to people of all ages. It should be as equally inviting both for passive use, people walking and passing by as they're going about their business downtown, but also for events. And both groups also emphasize that it should be a place that's both usable and programmed year-round. In terms of the design, there was generally, both groups were in favor of some kind of hardscape in the central portion of the site. And again, we focus on that Lot 4 as a concept. So their vision was a hardscape center with landscaping around the perimeter. They felt that both groups thought it was important that that the site be integrated into Ann Arbor Street, and were even amenable to reconfiguring or removing those on-street parking spaces on Ann Arbor if that was necessary to better integrate the space and make it more functional. The only discrepancy between the 2 groups was about a structure. One group preferred or thought that there would be a need for a farmer's market structure, a larger farmer's market structure. The other group preferred just an open, multi-use flex space. But in general, the feedback was fairly consistent between both groups. And both did like the idea of some kind of smaller bandshell or pavilion. Priority amenities were water and electric service, primarily for events. Both groups thought restrooms would be great, but I think understood the potential cost of providing restrooms. And lastly, both groups wanted fixtures, benches, planters that could not only be used for seating, but also potentially something that kids could play on, something unique and inviting that could serve dual purposes. Oh, and of course, Wi-Fi. So a lot of this feedback came from an exercise we call a visual preference survey. We prepared a number of boards that showed picture examples of different kinds of amenities and asked each group of participants to pick what they liked and what they didn't like, and then discuss it. And again, these helped us narrow down those specific design elements that will then allow us to generate some preliminary cost estimates for you. So the next few slides are going to be the photos of what the groups liked the most. In terms of a farmer's market structure, both favored this kind of contemporary design, smaller structure, although, as I mentioned, one group preferred just an open space that could be used for a variety of events. In terms of structures themselves, both groups preferred kind of a modern, contemporary look with a mix of materials, metal, masonry, and wood. Both groups favored a smaller stage structure that was positioned and sort of worked in relation to a larger open space, either for seating or a flex space for events. These are the types of favored seating options, and as I mentioned, they liked the idea of something that, a planter that could double as a bench, or a bench that might be appealing for kids to play on, although there were differing opinions about material preferences. Same was true with hardscape. There was no big winner there, but the takeaway seemed to be that people favored a design, a variety of color and texture. And these were the favored landscape planters. Again, they liked the curvilinear aspect of one of these images, and also the idea of multiple levels to add visual variety and dimension to the space. And so next I'll hand it off. So based on all this input, we prepared the first concept plan that we'll present to you today.
Thank
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jennifer Morris, and I am a principal with OHM Advisors. It's nice that I actually get to see all of your faces as opposed to you looking down. So that is a nice place in this presentation. So our role here has been primarily to focus on the concept plan. So kind of full disclosure here, we are principally an engineering firm. I am not. Rachel is not an engineer, but we have been your engineer for a long time. So hence why this relationship between the two companies made so much sense. We have that background and we understand the community. But we are here to get your feedback on these concept plans. We took all the information that Mike just reviewed, and we started pulling together a concept plan. But then there was some discussion in the community, and we realized we needed to take a little bit of a pivot and adjust kind of our thinking to make sure that it fit within some of the feedback that we were hearing from our internal review team and from council, and then also just the community as a whole. So what we have before you tonight, we really feel is a great approach that's going to work as you move forward into the future. And obviously, as was indicated before, still allows you to utilize the space for some continued parking, for events, and for farmers market. So with that, what I'm going to do, because I don't know about you, but I like to doodle when someone else is talking, so I'm going to actually hand out hard copies of the concept plan so that you can mark them up as you wish, and then I will turn it over to Rachel so that she can walk through each of them for you.
No, just hand them to Councilmember Harmont. We can make sure they're passed out.
Thank you.
To everyone at the dais. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Bush. I am a planner with OHM Advisors. It's great to meet all of you this evening, and I'm excited to share more about the concept development with you. Go ahead and pull it up.
Pull that microphone just a little bit closer to you. Very good.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, sorry about that.
Nope, it's all right.
Just one more moment before I get started. I don't want to rush everybody. Great. So the first page that we'll start with is Phase 1. That is our starting point. This concept was developed through, to reiterate what Mike was saying, through 2 focus group sessions, as well as feedback from our project team with the City of Saline and Saline Main Street. A bit about the layout of the document in front of you. We've got a legend to the left, the concept in the center, and some eye candy to the right, showing the possible amenities and uses of the downtown public space. So I will just quickly go through the number labels. So the dumpster will receive a screening treatment and a slight reorientation to accommodate angled parking. The drive aisle will accommodate two-way parking off of West Henry Street and address some traffic circulation issues that have been discussed with that parking area. The number 2 is a sort of passive space. You have the option here of implementing turf or lawn or a contrasting hardscape to create an open and inviting space. Number 3 represents the planters and seating around the perimeter of the central passive space. And number 4 is a nod to the history of the Mastodon tracks identified in Saline with the Mastodon Mounds play area. It offers that sort of activity for families who are waiting to go to dinner or just want something to do while they're downtown, and is a nod to Saline's history, and also offers some seating nearby. Number 5 is a shaded seating grove. There's 2 rows of trees shown there, but that can also be replaced with umbrellas, depending on your maintenance needs. And number 6 and 7 represent the pergola-like structure, which act as a gateway to the park off of Ann Arbor Street. This is also functioning as the stage, sort of the focal point, the experience as you enter the public space. And there will be swinging benches as well, located along the pergola. And there are 15 parking spaces that would be retained through the implementation of the parking and circulation plan seen here. So building on that, we heard that it was very important to maintain or expand the opportunity for the farmers market, which already happens at this parking lot. So we heard that and we ran with it. I not only made space for 37 farmers market tents and several vehicles within the site, but we also identified the opportunity to expand the farmers market into street parking on Ann Arbor Street. And finally, the Oktoberfest layout was given to us, and we accommodated the dimensions of the tents and provided some additional gathering spaces within this public space. We didn't want to take away from any real estate that is already used for the programming and events that happen on this site. We really just wanted to enhance them and make sure that it is still as comfortable and easy to enjoy as it is right now. So building on that, the reason we are showing phase 2 is to explain that there is possibility and viability to build on phase 1 in a phased approach. And if the community supports it, if it's feasible, you can continue building onto the space and really create a downtown destination that will allow more users to enjoy the space, draw more people to downtown, and have more people visiting the businesses around Michigan and Ann Arbor Street. So the biggest change to parking and circulation is that the parking area does become one-way and results in just 5 parallel parking spots. There's a plaza-like entry with ornamental trees from the parking area, a contrasting hardscape surface, and the eastern portion of the plaza remains the same. And again, the 37 tents for the farmers market can be accommodated even with these changes, as well as the event layout for Oktoberfest. And now we would like to hear from you. You can let us respond to these questions or let us know your immediate reactions, feedback.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Mr. Harrington, I apologize for my tardiness. Is there anything that you would like to add or comment on at this time before we open it up for questions from the dais?
No, I think that was a great introduction. I'd kind of go back to the beginning of the presentation. It's very much a concept of trying to move the ball forward on what the city's talked about for a long period of time. The lot that was chosen because out of what's currently owned by the city, it's the most viable. And whether or not the city chooses to do it here or acquire property and do it somewhere else, or it at least gives us a better idea of what our costs are when this is done. We'll get a cost estimate for what phase 1 would look like. And then additionally, that parking cost, what are we giving up in terms of parking spaces, which I think helps evaluate the overall cost-benefit analysis of whether this would be a more appropriate or better use of our land that we own as a city downtown, as we've kind of been stuck on a little bit of a spinning tire of assuming what would be great if this private property owner did for us. So it allows us to really to be proactive with this planning process, and yeah, we're eager to hear your feedback.
Very good. This evening, for questions, I'm going to start to my extreme right with Councilmember Lesh, and I'll end with Councilmember Harmount, and then if I have questions or comments, I will ask them subsequent to my colleague, Ms. Harmount. We do have just slightly under a half hour, so I'm going to impose a strict time limit. I'm going to give you 5 minutes exactly, so please try to exercise some brevity. And please mention who specifically your question is for. You can obviously ask questions of staff, our guests from either OHM or Carlisle Wortman, and perhaps you even have a question or comment or would like some feedback or reaction from our Main Street director who's also in the audience this evening. So with that, Mr. Lesh, I'll begin with you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very, very nice design. I like it. You were talking about possibly eliminating parking and things on Ann Arbor Saline Road. You know, I think there's just a few spots right there anyway. Would the sidewalk still, would it be pushed out more towards the center of the street then, or how would that be?
It would just, because it would be used on a temporary basis, we would just use that, the area that exists.
Okay.
So we wouldn't change the sidewalk. It would just remain as is. It's just instead of parking, it would be used for tents or whatever, you know.
Food trucks or
Exactly,
whatever.
correct. Yep. And I think we estimate about a 5 to 7, I think, stalls could be put in there.
Yep. You know, I'm still trying to ruminate it all, so I'll pass it down to Councilmember Seal.
Easy enough. Thank you, Mr. Lesh. Councilmember Seal, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor. 2 questions. First of all, any idea, any cost estimate at this time? I understand costs go up over time, but what would the cost estimate be for Phase 1 or Phase 2 if it were done today?
I don't want to give you a cost estimate yet because that's part of our next phase, so I wouldn't be able to really give you an accurate number, but that is something that you will be receiving. Once we get the feedback and you're comfortable with the concepts, we will then cost out all of the elements that we have in each of the phases.
Okay, the other query that I've had addressed to me by some residents is if we do this kind of a plan in Lot 4, I think it's Lot 4, isn't it? How do we accommodate the loss of the parking places?
Well, one thing that we found, and this was discussed in Carla's presentation, is that you actually have adequate parking downtown. It's just that the on-street spaces aren't as frequently used. So it's obviously that's going to be a conversation that you will have to have and a decision that you'll have to make. Because obviously there are pros and cons, and that's going to be something that you will have to determine whether you're comfortable losing any spaces. I mean, we did obviously identify how many spaces would be lost with Phase 1, but we did, add a kind of replace and relay out the parking so that you still would have some parking on that back half. So I think that ultimately that's a call that you're going to have to make as a community.
Okay.
If I can just add on to that, too, the city, with DPW Director Searles and I recently met with Wade Trim, which is another engineering consultant, to come up with a better wayfinding plan for our on-street parking signage downtown. I'll add that it wasn't just the 2022 parking study that showed that we were overparked as a community. We had a surplus of open parking spaces within a quarter of a mile of that center of the city. But another study done in 2019, and from my understanding, another study that was done in 2015, it's been confirmed over and over again. I think it's just a matter of maybe changing our own behaviors when we're looking for parking, that maybe in a downtown area, it's not going to be immediately adjacent to the business, but I'm going to have to walk less than 3 minutes to my destination.
Okay. The last question I have then is this gateway and stage, number 7. Which of these 2 renderings here, I assume those would be the lower right renderings that you're talking about for number 7?
Let's see. How do I go back on this? Let's see if I can get back to it.
Right there.
Yep. So yes, it would be the lower right, and that is just an example. Well, actually, it could be either. The
Okay.
lower right or the lower left, either one of those could be used in that location.
Okay, so that would then open out onto Area 2, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, That's all the questions I have at this time.
Very good, thank you, Mr. CO. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. So the first thing is that I appreciate what's being done. This is something we've talked about for a long time. And what I want to kind of first understand is we're trying to put a lot of amenities here in this one area. When we looked at another area on the opposite side of Michigan Avenue, which is called Merchant Park, it's a very small alleyway. The same sort of concept came up of we wanted to be everything to everybody. And then we all of a sudden realized that we took this cute little space and we filled it so full of stuff that it was almost claustrophobic. And I mean, it's hard to gauge on this because it looks vast, but being in that parking lot, it's not as vast as it may seem. So, I mean, is there any fear that that's what's going to happen, that we're trying too hard to put too many things into a space?
Well, I mean, obviously, we were trying to respond to as many of the concerns or desires of the community as possible. But the center area is actually, it is a decent size, but we also allowed for a smaller play area and a smaller dining area so that you wouldn't feel that claustrophobic in the space. But with that being said, we have this identified as Phase 1. If you so choose, it could be broken into multiple phases, and just to see how that feels. Maybe it becomes, Phase 1A, Phase 1B. That's something that you could certainly look at. But, I mean, we don't feel that this will make you feel claustrophobic in this particular space.
Okay, I appreciate that. So one of the things that is making me a little bit concerned when I look at this, the way it is, and obviously it's a concept, is accessibility. Swinging seats, tiered levels, things like that. They're not screaming accessibility to me. So for me, that's a big, first and foremost. So I hope that's something that we're going to look at when we start looking at any kind of plans, is making sure that we're doing that. The grassy area, it sounds good in concept. Is it going to be easy to maintain? Is it going to be more of a hassle than it's worth, than the aesthetic of it? What's your experience in that?
Well, first of all, we're not envisioning this to actually be grass that you have to mow.
Okay.
So this would be turf or some type of an alternative hard surfacing.
Okay.
So yes, it would, because that would definitely not be an easy area to maintain otherwise.
I appreciate that.
Do you want to talk about accessibility too? Because that was one of the
Yes.
revisions we had on this plan, and I think it kind of answers your first question.
Yes. So we actually made a change so that the northern east-west sidewalk is completely accessible. Originally, it wasn't accessible. It was accessible up until the steps, but the steps are actually inside of that sidewalk. So they're not, you wouldn't be impeded from walking through. So you do have that connection through from the back parking lot up to Ann Arbor Street. So that is accessible. And then as far as whether it's accessible from Ann Arbor Street into the rest of the area, we have it slightly elevated. The stage is a little bit elevated, but it doesn't have to be. It can be at grade, or it can be sloped. So, there are some tweaks that can be made. As everyone knows, there is a little bit of grade that we're dealing with in the park, but do we have enough grade to have that step plus 2 more steps down into that secondary area? That would require engineering, an engineering analysis to really be able to fully determine that.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that that was a factor. One of the other factors I'm wondering about is sun. So is it going to be, you're going to have a stage that's going to be directly impacted by setting sun? And so kind of understanding the orientation of it is that the best way to do it? Turning it that way? Just understanding, is that going to impede on the use of it, the timing of it, things like that? Because as you can see with some of our downtown businesses, there are certain hours of the day, especially in the summer, which is going to be your prime thing, which, as the sun is setting, if you're on the wrong side of the sidewalk, it's a bit brutal, to be honest. So just sort of understanding the orientation of it. I know right now, utilizing that parking lot, Main Street actually has a stage where you would have your number 6. So it's going the other direction, so it's not, you don't have sun going into people's eyes that are.
Can I just comment on that real quickly?
Yes.
So the stage that we're talking about as that entrance is really just kind of, it's a dual purpose, and it's really intended to be, maybe you have a street performer, or maybe you're bringing in someone from the community that, sings and plays guitar, or whatever the case may be. It's going to be something that's a little bit, that's smaller, that's more low-keyed. And it does, there is a pergola to help with some of that shading effect. But because of what we were trying to achieve with the phasing, that was in part why we put that stage there. But obviously, your event stage for your major events would still be at the back end and then facing the east.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I'll stop you there because we're past the 5-minute
Okay,
mark.
thank you.
We'll hopefully have another round of questions or certainly continue this conversation at a subsequent meeting. Mr. Gearbaugh, you have 5 minutes if you'd like them.
Thank you. I appreciate the design and everything, because this really was what I was hoping for, was the conceptual idea that we could either lift off at this spot, put it anywhere else, because I see right now there's 3 or 4 potential spots in downtown that this could be applied to. Some of my questions I have are, when you're looking at how the design was, how was maintenance and weather considerations taken into place? Because I know you mentioned, like, when you look at the trees, and we look at open space, so we're either going to have to be shoveling snow, sweeping leaves, all of that. So how does that come into play when you were designing this in terms of any kind of maintenance and oversight?
Well, I mean, the maintenance, one of the reasons why we decided or recommended a turf versus grass is for maintenance purpose right there. You would have to decide, and I think that Rachel made this comment in her presentation, you would have to decide whether you wanted to have the trees in that dining area or if you'd prefer to have umbrellas. That would obviously be a maintenance decision. A lot of everything else that is in there is relatively low maintenance, but it's not maintenance-free. So it is obviously, I mean, we looked at it from an aesthetic standpoint and what would feel right for, kind of the functionality and its full usability. But maintenance is definitely a factor and something that you're going to have to determine whether it's located here or in another location.
And anticipated lifespan of this? I mean, we looked at, like, trees only last between 20 to 30 years, all of that. So we're looking at an investment that would be what? How do you see it, 25, 30 years of even that?
Well, I mean, your hardscape obviously would last a considerable amount of time. I can't tell you for certain how long the turf would last. It would depend on usability and, events and the like. The trees are, they're going to last as long as a tree typically, lasts. It's going to depend on a variety, obviously, that you install. So I can't really give you a definitive time frame on how long everything is going to last. But, I think you understand, typically how long a street tree lasts or, a bush or whatever in the community.
Because conceptually now, we know that the plaza that's behind the one set of buildings is already failing, and it's due to the trees, it's due to the cement, it's due to the weather, everything, and it's only 25 years old,
Right.
so.
Obviously, if I could, obviously, we would, if you actually want to take this to the next level, we would make sure that we have our landscape architects involved to try and recommend, material that's going to be, last as long as possible, plantings that are going to last as long as possible. So, all of those would definitely be part of that next phase package if you decide to move forward.
And when you look at the layout for the parking, what's presented here and just the numbers are general because of when you actually put in the real standard measurements and everything, is this going to be a good representation of the number of spaces we would lose?
Yeah, this is going to be a good representation, yes.
Thank you. The only other thing, a couple things was, the adjoining buildings, and I love, the design, but it would be great if those buildings, I think, would be able to actually have access onto this. So consideration would be made to have that type of accessibility to this property. And I don't know if we've even taken that into consideration for the possibility of either side. Because both of those buildings could have the capability of having much greater access, but also value in being able to do that. So just an idea. And then the other one, I did like where you identified, because one of the things I mentioned to Mr. Harrington was the idea that the green space would be able to be where you could put structure or on the ground that could allow for the tents and everything to be established, which would be one. And then lastly, as we talked about the concern of parking, this really isn't as much as yours. I think where we're really going to have the biggest concern is, are we as a city going to provide residential parking for the buildings that never really were identified for residential parking? And so that's the issue where we start determining where's parking going to go. I think that's the concern, because now we have apartments in those buildings, which in the past haven't. And so,
And the city staff is working on that issue already as
Yeah.
well. We're doing a lot of parking.
I mean, that's the issue. When we start looking at this issue with parking, losing it here isn't as much as, when I think of parking, we're providing it for customers and we're providing it for visitors, for the community and all that. I'm not so sure we're going to be the ones providing residential parking that subsidizes property owners. So however that plays out in this development, I think that's one of the considerations. And that's it for me.
Perfect. That's just about 5 minutes exactly. Thank you, Mr. Gearbach. Councilmember Rice, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for this. This is exciting. I was part of the stakeholder group. My colleagues have covered a lot of what I was writing down here. I think the one thing that I would love to see as you do the financials behind this, financial estimates, in looking at these areas where we're going to have some shade, or in maybe even in the play area, doing a cost estimate for things like shade sails and structures as opposed to trees, because I do agree with my colleagues. We've had some troubles with trees downtown, the maintenance, things like that, the lifespan. So I would like to see, maybe two versions of that, natural versus structural shade. And then also, I don't know if you planned on within this additional furniture like picnic tables for that Area 5, or things like that, and whether or not that was going to be built into it as well, because those would be additional things that the city would have to, implement if we had these nice designs there as well. And then thirdly, I want to just reiterate what my colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon said, is looking into making as much of this accessible as possible. I don't want to limit not be able to get to Area 2, so I do like that idea of perhaps the stage gazebo area being at more of a level space, or some sort of a ramp off of that. I do not want to build anything going forward in the downtown area that is not fully accessible, no matter your abilities. But other than that, I think this is a wonderful, conglomeration of all of the ideas that I heard in the session that I was in. And yeah, I love that we can, take this concept, this is a square. We can find squares elsewhere if we so see it fit. That's all that I have, though. Thanks for covering all this.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Harmont, you have 5 minutes if you'd like it.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I had a chance to go to Washington DC this last weekend, and one of the things that struck me is that they had some areas that were LEED certified for sustainability, and I wanted to know if sustainable design was part of this with regards to water filling stations, recycling that's waste management, purposefully positioned, and zero-scape.
Well, I can tell you that we did not factor in any water filling stations, but that is something obviously that could be added if the city so chooses to do that. And I mean, as far as LEED certification, we do have landscape architects that could certainly take it to that level if you wanted to do that. I mean, we are in essence kind of doing a zero-scape by not putting in grass and doing the turf. But, are there additional things that could potentially be done to make it more sustainable? That certainly could be considered. Once again, as I said, if we go forward with the next phase of design, I think that we could certainly factor that in.
I'm just thinking for funding and that's available for sustainability, that might be to have that built into the concept. Also, I'm having a hard time visualizing that entrance with the pergola and that for performers there. Would it be big enough to have, 5 performers? Because we have a cappella groups at the farmers market and such. Is it big enough for that? And is it going to be, like has been mentioned before, covered?
And the size of that can certainly be adjusted. I mean, we gave 2 examples of what it could potentially look like. It can be shrunk, it can be enlarged, it can be made wider. So, I mean, depending on, what you want. I mean, we were envisioning maybe 1 or 2 performers. If you typically have larger groups performing maybe at the farmer's market, then maybe you do want to consider something a little bit larger. So it certainly can be adjusted.
So is it, are people walking through the same area that the stage is? I'm not understanding that.
Well, it's an area where you can walk through, but you can also walk through in the sidewalk. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Just real quickly, one of the things that really came up through the stakeholder input is make the spaces as flexible in use and functionality as possible. And that kind of falls through the stage idea. The stage idea really is, the one that was the most favored was a very open-ended structure for the stage that you could increase or decrease the size of who used it just because it's so open. And so all the different functions of the space are intended to be multifunctional to allow for a variety of operations, and that carries over to the stage as well. Thanks.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Oh, you have Councilmember Harmon?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Harrington, since this is the, I guess, the first opportunity in which this rendering in its totality is being submitted for public review, I'm working off the assumption that excluding Main Street, this has not been shared with other community stakeholders or groups that have a particular interest in downtown and that lot specifically. So I'm thinking of Picnic in the Park, Farmers Market.
So the farmers market was actively involved. They were one of the members of the focus group. Dana, who runs the farmers market, was, and she has been since sent aspects of the design to confirm that it kind of meets her expectations, and I think we can continue to do that too. We're happy to widely disseminate it. If the Saline Post is turning in, please feel free to share this online and gather some feedback. I think for all of you, now that we have a concept plan, I think it would be good to maybe garner more feedback from your own constituents and see what they think of it as well. So.
Great. I would recommend maybe making contact with Paul Heineck, who would be at Picnic in the Park. That's Saline Summerfest.
Right, and Paul, I believe, was also invited. I think he was on one of the focus groups. I could be wrong about that, but I can follow up with Paul as well.
And of course, Mary, we would encourage you to widely disseminate this to anyone and everyone involved in Saline Main Street. I guess one question for our guests. We so appreciate your time this evening and your work on this.
Our pleasure.
I can't tell from these renderings, but I'm referring to a space. What's up on the screen? I would be referring to that top right-hand corner. There's an area of the downtown adjacent to Lot 4, next to the privately held business, The Esthetician. It's a large concrete area with bike racks. That was put in 2016 as part of the Michigan Avenue makeover. Good concept, good idea. Not well used, and in my judgment, not particularly attractive. I think it's important to provide bike racks and space for people who bike and want to secure their vehicle safely downtown, but I think that space could be reclaimed and an added amenity or a new amenity could be placed there. Did you or your associates take any look at that, or do a deep dive or analysis on that area?
Actually, in talking with Ben and Colleen and Mary, we were given the exact same information that you just relayed, that it was not used as well as maybe originally intended. So we did reclaim that area for this concept. So the bike parking is not included in this concept.
Okay. And so I think it would essentially be maybe number 7
Yeah,
on the rendering?
Right. Number 7 is actually just representing the swinging benches. So it is not that is not presently where we have any bike parking.
Yeah, Mayor Marl, it's probably to the east of where the number 6 is currently, but you can see there's some additional landscaping there, beds, that greenery. it kind of runs north-south there.
I
That
just think it's an underutilized space, and if we are going to move forward with this, that's worth considering. I like a number of the amenities and features outlined in this report. Like a number of my colleagues, I'm interested in seeing if this could be placed elsewhere in the downtown. I think you're correct that Lot 4 is, for a variety of reasons, the most advantageous option, but there are other options. So that's something I'd like to explore. Perhaps this is a question for you, maybe for Mr. Harrington. When do we expect to have some cost estimates for council and staff to review and evaluate?
Right, so I think the goal for us was to gather your feedback, to see what you liked and disliked, what would be a non-negotiable type thing, and then produce a three-dimensional design as well as those more robust cost estimates. So
Okay, because we're running short on time this evening, what's the deadline? When would you like additional comments and feedback provided to you in writing? The next 2 weeks, before the end of July?
Yeah, I think before the end of July would be sufficient.
By July 30th, just hold on just one second, I've got a few more questions. So by July 31st at the very, very latest?
Yes, and I think that would give them enough time to continue forward with the project.
Okay. I too am a little bit concerned with the potential loss of parking. I do think, generally speaking, we have an excess of parking in our downtown, but there are key times of the day and specific times of the week where we lack parking, and if we're going to be adding a new spot, which in theory will entice more people to congregate and gather downtown, I think that could exacerbate the problem further. It's not a deal breaker for me, but that's something I would like to work through. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole this evening, but I'm pleased that it was mentioned because I'm going to message on it just one last time. Merchant Park, we've been talking about Merchant Park for the better part of a decade. And with all due respect, we've sort of dithered on that issue for nearly 10 years. I could use some very pejorative, rude language, but let's just say it looks abysmal. And I think our standard in this community, I like to work off the assumption that Saline commits itself to a standard of excellence, and that's not in any way reflective of that standard in my judgment. So I think there's some small things we could do to that area this year, but I'd really like to make that a priority during the construction season of 2025. Thank you again for your time. One last opportunity for questions, but you need to make it really brief. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and then I'll jump to Mr. Gearbaugh.
Thank you. Just one quick comment is that I think it's absolutely essential that there's public restrooms built into this project. I don't know, if you have a gathering space, where do you expect people to go? And so I think that that's something that we really need to look at. We've talked about this for years, building accessible public restrooms in our downtown, and I think this would be the time in which you would have to be a part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh.
And just real quick, this plan shows, is it taking into account the incline of that parking lot? So when I'm looking at number 2, it's the idea that we would have a double layer or
Correct.
fill and fill in that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Very good. Real quick, Mr. Sion.
On your original, in your concept plan phase 1, on area 2, you show, looks like a beam on both the north and south side. What is that? What does that represent?
That, whoops, oh, we jumped, sorry. Is that a, I'm going the wrong way? No, I don't know. Oh, there, oh, it's just jumping.
Right there.
Okay.
See the brown, right?
That's the planting, okay. So that's the planter seating. So it's actually seating.
Okay.
So that would be the upper left corner of the examples.
Okay, just a quick comment, too. I'm familiar with the west side of the state, spent a good deal of time over there in Montague, Michigan, in their public parking area. Somewhat similar to this, they've created a gathering area. And the thing that strikes me about that makes it most appealing, at least to my eye, is the simplicity. And this, we've got an awful lot of stuff going on. And I wonder if that isn't maybe like Mayor Pro Tem Dillon said, a little bit claustrophobic by putting so many things in there. Just a comment.
Fair enough.
Appreciate that. Thank you all. Appreciate your time. Again, per Mr. Harrington's comments, you have 2 weeks as of this Wednesday, the 17th. You have the 31st at 5 p.m. to get additional comments and questions to city staff. I would very much advise you to stick to that deadline because we'd like to keep moving forward on this. We're developing some good momentum here, and I'd like to see if we could produce something tangible in the not-too-distant future, but that will require additional meetings, additional conversations, and more work by this body, staff, and community stakeholders. If there's nothing further, I would seek a motion to adjourn this work meeting at 7:01.
So moved.
Moved by CO, seconded by Gearbaugh. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Ayes have it. The meeting is adjourned. You have 2 minutes. We're going to begin promptly at 7:03. Which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We do have a slightly revised agenda in front of you. For those of you who are in the audience, we encourage you to sign in the back. There are also copies of the agenda on the back table, along with hearing devices if you require them. From City Council, we have Council Members Gearbaugh, CO, Rice, Lesh, Harmount, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Marl. From City Staff, we have the City Treasurer, Clerk, Community Development Director, Police Chief, and Wastewater Treatment Superintendent, along with our DPW Director. At this time, actually, before we entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended, I would like to ask for a moment of silence. It's with deep regret that I was notified yesterday of the passing of Terry Seams, who was first hired in as a part-time road patrol officer, subsequently did about a 10-year stint as a dispatcher for Saline PD, and this was after a very distinguished career at University of Michigan Public Safety. You may also recall that Terry's wife, Sergeant Bridget Seams, retired from Saline as first a patrol officer and then subsequently as a member of command staff. Terry was a very nice gentleman, excellent police officer, phenomenal dispatcher. He was missed when he retired from the organization, and now that he has passed, I know that he will be greatly missed by family and friends. So at this time, I would ask that you bow your heads for a brief moment of silence in honor of the very distinguished life of Terry Seams. Thank you very much. We do have a slightly revised agenda. I think one item was removed earlier from the consent portion of our agenda and added under new business. If there are no additional changes, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Moved by Seal. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Lesh. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. There are no absences, so we'll proceed to public comments under the Open Meetings Act. Any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments on agenda items? I would defer to the city clerk. Were there any written comments provided in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? No, sir. Easy enough. Then we'll proceed to the one and only presentation, which is downtown mixed use and residential renderings. And this will be, the presentation will be performed by our Community Development Director, Mr. Harrington. As soon as you're ready to go with your PowerPoint, Mr. Harrington, you may begin.
We are good to go. So this was prepared, and again, with conjunction with Planner Auerbach, who just took off, as well as Chris Nordstrom, who's CWA's licensed landscape architect. This is part of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority's Housing Readiness Initiative grant. That's a mouthful. But essentially, the state is helping us evaluate aspects of our zoning code, and then this was kind of a more creative, conceptual way to look at our downtown code specifically, and whether or not we think our current existing form-based standards that were adopted in the early 2010s are still the development trajectory we want the city to be on. There's no formal decisions being made tonight. This is just, if people built to our existing standards, what would density in our downtown look like? What would these structures generally look like? They're called white box because, as you can see, there's no detail to them. They're meant to be very high level, very conceptual, just to get an idea of building massing, height, and setbacks. So we're just going to take you through a couple of the conceptual sites that we looked at. And just to be clear, this is what is already allowed underneath the city code. This is not proposing any change or anything like that. So this is currently zone D2. It is the Gunther site. So it's a residential example of what you would see. So you have the townhomes essentially there massed together that would front Michigan Ave, and then likely a parking area in between. I think this is another same photo of that from the street view. So you can see they'd be just a little bit taller than the existing street lamps on this site. Because of how that grade dips, they would appear to be shorter than the buildings that are immediately adjacent to it, which are the 109, Benny's Bakery, and that set of buildings. Under the alternative example of it being D1 zoning, you would probably switch from a townhome model more into a traditional mixed use, something that would blend more closely be more closely aligned with the existing buildings on the immediately adjacent sites of Benny's Bakery. Again, looking at those older brick buildings. So going down to the street level, you can see they'd be a little bit taller, and with the grade, they would probably peak up to about what the existing buildings are, the big existing historic buildings. And again, you're looking at a 3-story building, probably with a good amount of windows. We have a pretty large transparency requirement in our downtown form district that requires people to either have 50% of their front facade, either glass, public art, or something else that would meet the intent of that can be determined by the Planning Commission. I think notably, too, it's kind of hard to see, but these buildings are all smaller than the steeples that kind of define the current characteristic of downtown Saline. We have a lot of these historic churches. None of these buildings under the current provision of the code would be taller than any of the steeples in our downtown. Looking at Hall Street and McKay Street, it's a little bit more unique. This is right next to the existing, I can't remember the name of the church, it's Presbyterian Church. So looking at East McKay as well as Hall Street under the D1 example. So again, you're seeing these taller buildings. They would stay below the existing steeples, but definitely provide a little bit more density and activation on Hall Street compared to the 2 houses that are currently unoccupied, the surface lot and the prayer garden. So here's just another visual of what that would look like staring down Hall Street, of how tall this building would kind of feel comparative to the church in the background, the water tower. It'd definitely be a departure from the current house that's there. But again, this is currently allowed by right if someone were to choose to come and buy one of those homes from the Presbyterian Church. Moving on to Harris Street and Henry Street. This is behind the Speedway where One Stop Soul Shop used to be and next to Klingberg. It is zone D1. We were trying to match the additional residential district, so it's shown as more of like a pitched roof concept rather than the flat roofs you saw on the other ones. So flat roof there, pitched roof here. So probably more like a dense townhome development, maybe a 2-story quad or eightplex essentially. Again, that's allowed by right. It is zone D1 already. whether or not someone would choose to build this, given the other economic conditions, where they would park. There is some parking provided on the back, but those are obviously considerations as well. Again, this picture is just shown to give you a concept of really how tall these buildings will be. If you look at like the Berwick condos, for example, a little bit taller than that, but not quite as tall as the Wexford condos, which have that tuck under a garage that really give it some extra elevation. So that's not how we have these shown, and they still stay underneath the city's height requirement, and they have that front green area setback as well. Looking at what it would look like as a flat roof, you'd probably need to provide more additional parking in that immediate vicinity. Again, there's no other city lot that's necessarily next to it. Yeah. More of the same. Looking again at McKay and Hall Street, a combination of D1 and D2 zoning. This is more across from City Hall. You can see City Hall in the bottom corner here in our little plaza. So if I believe that home is currently owned by the Evangelical Lutheran Church, but if that whole block essentially out that window is redeveloped and we modified the zoning to allow the D1 and D2 districts there, you would see probably denser townhomes with more development. So this is, again, what's allowed underneath the code already. And essentially, we're just going through these. If you have thoughts or ideas, if you like the density that you're seeing, if you don't think that it's sufficient or tall enough, that's the feedback we're getting. We're at a very, very preliminary stage. We're going to go through this with the Planning Commission as well, just to kind of show you it. And there's no hurry to get feedback on this item. It's just, again, something that we were funded to do to kind of see what it would look like and go from there. And that's the end of my presentation.
Very good, thank you. Again, not required to ask any questions or make any comments at this time, but if you'd like to, we would welcome that. Mr. Lesh, or Councilmember Lesh, you have 5 minutes if you'd like it.
Nothing at this time.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Seal?
Nothing at this time.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Thank you. I appreciate this. I'm a very visual person, so it really helps me to see what's going on. I guess for me, understanding as we start looking at this, and just to be very clear, this is not an eminent domain situation. We're not looking at taking properties so that people are watching don't need to panic about this. But when you look at some of the bigger pictures, if maybe the one at the corner of Harris and Henry, that one is, so would we look at redeveloping that entire, like where One Soul Shop was? Is that also zoned the same way?
Yep, so that whole block is zoned in the D1 district. And I guess to your point, you're right, the city's not looking at eminent domain. This is if a private party were to buy any of these properties today, they could develop this by right. They would have to go through a site plan process with the Planning Commission to confirm it meets the standards. But essentially, we're saying that as of today, someone could buy any of the properties shown and do these products more or less without much issue or animosity with the city.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great idea. I do like the idea of keeping the residential character in the streets that have more of a residential one with a pitched roof versus the flat roof. I think does seem more of a, the Main Street kind of a
Right, and I think that's exactly the type of comment we're looking for, because we're in a position where the state of Michigan has granted us some dollars to potentially evaluate aspects of that, and even small design tweaks like saying, immediately adjacent to residential, the roof type has to be different.
Right.
That just provides us a little bit more criteria to evaluate proposals, because we could stand to beef up our form-based code to make it more about form. Currently, we're half use, half form, and that's not necessarily the best position to be in with it.
So my biggest question for you is that, so we would have an increase in housing. What are we going to do with parking? I see that you've got like surface lots around these things. Is that really what the ideal situation is to get into having more pavement? I mean, is it, creating a structure somewhere that you're going to sort of have a collective parking?
Right, and that's another issue within our downtown code specifically. So the D2, I would have to look at the specifics of it, are required to provide parking on site. The D1 users are not necessarily, they can offset. And in theory, they're supposed to be buying parking from the city if they're planning on using the city lots. But it doesn't seem like an aspect of city policy that was fully fleshed out after the original form-based code was adopted. Yes, even looking at things like the parking and as if that's appropriate, where should that parking really be? Should it be underground? Should we require that? That has very large cost implications to developers, but very large aesthetic and functional implications to the city as well.
Right. And I mean, I guess I'll just end with a comment of, I know at our last meeting, we talked about more holistic development. I mean, I think that this obviously is very ripe for that, is looking we obviously can't control that a developer's going to buy this parcel or that parcel or both parcels, but sort of giving them the idea of this is how we envision our community and really stressing that, I think could bring about the results that we're looking for. And I think this is a great first step for it.
Right, and I'll add that the for sure step that we've talked to CWA about is the one major change is to add more diagrams. A typical form-based code has a lot of diagrams of what's expected. We have one specifically for what a fence should be in our downtown, which is kind of what SALT has. It's that brick with the metal, the rings, as opposed to like a standard wood or chain link fence. So we have that diagram established, but we could stand to add a few more on really what we want to see out of buildings, facade types, things of that nature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. My only comment, Mr. Harrington, it would be in reference to either your first or second slide.
Gunther property?
Yes. Yeah.
You want to see the townhomes?
No, I don't need to see the townhomes. Thank you. Unequivocally, I'm very much in favor of concept 2, which would be, yes, more of a mixed use for that parcel along Michigan Ave, where you'd have retail, office space, professional office on the ground level with apartment, condo, loft living on a second or third floor.
Absolutely.
I feel very strongly about that. Now, that was proposed many years ago. That development, for a variety of reasons, floundered, but conceptually, I think that would be good for that space and good for the downtown. Mr. Gearbaugh, any questions or comments?
Yeah, and of course, this has been, and thank you for bringing forward the vision that I've been looking for the last few years, is trying to figure out what would we do downtown, especially when you look at McKay Street and some of these other properties. Because the realization, that one there, the realization is that if we're going to grow as a city and to provide for more users and address all the other things, we're going to have to start looking at this in areas that we want to see this kind of development. When you're looking at this example, we've talked about 0 lot lines and some of these other things. So the example on McKay Street, where you have the houses on the other side of the sidewalk, would you change that even further because it's more, make it more urban by basically removing some of the green space? And
There's a variety of trade-offs to consider and to make there. I am more of a fan of the 0 lot lines on on Hall Street, excuse me, but I do think as you kind of get more into this end that you can see from right out the window, it makes sense to transition it more to residential. Obviously, the city does not exercise a 0 lot line with our city hall. Granted, things could change if we chose to expand or modify the city hall operation, but, but those are all options and considerations too of what yard space are we really wanting to see. And that was also noted in the master plan for like the Central Village District as well, that, you need to have some walkout. The goal is to have connectivity with the sidewalk kind of out your front door to create that more dense community feel.
I think part of this is, and Councilmember Dillon and I were talking about this earlier, that some of these properties are going to have to be designed to make sure that we have that mixed use so that you do have the facilities and things that a higher density would have. So if somebody wants a grocery store or more restaurants or something like that, this will bring more downtown. The thing when I look at you had identified the D1 versus the D2, there's some issues in there right now. When you look at 30% green space, some of that is just not achievable downtown, and we need to reconsider that, because there's no way we're going to accomplish a more urban style in that area if you have to continue to meet that. So whatever we're needing to do in order to readdress the D1, the D2, the overlay district, all of that, we need to do at this point in time. And I think this is a good idea, but there conceptually are so many ideas, as you mentioned, that just don't work right now and that we haven't enforced or we haven't put in place. So as we move forward on this, I'd like to see what we can do quicker and not necessarily drag it out a long time.
Right, absolutely. And I can just add too, just for the public's edification, it's not really the question you had, but you mentioned the overlay district. This does not at all infringe on the historic property, historic status of homes. That's kind of entirely separate in some degrees. Obviously, it's very related, but we specifically looked at areas of the city that aren't historic homes necessarily, that aren't, our real 1800 stock. And I would ask, people who might be concerned about the density and Selene's rural heritage to maybe look back at what the city really originally was in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There were far more residences downtown than I think there are today. They become office users over time, and that's okay. But as we look to, going back to the work meeting, seek the viability of a public space, seek the viability of more diverse dining options so our residents don't have to drive to Ann Arbor to maybe get the food choices they're looking for. Households are the way to do that. If you get more people in the city, especially in the center city, which separates us from the townships, it's a great way to attract those types of businesses and really create a vibrant city center.
I think one thing for me, the biggest concern is acquisition of properties in order to do this as a private development. I think some of the things, even like the Presbyterian Church has been approaching, how to achieve some of these is through, housing subsidies or whatever else. My issue with this is I think this is going to help achieve that missing section of housing that we don't have in this community for seniors that don't necessarily want to move into a extended living or some type of facility like that, or even younger individuals that want to move into something similar to this that we just don't have currently, or that's up to the standards that we want it to be. So,
Absolutely.
whatever we can do to achieve that, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Councilmember Rice, any questions or comments for the Community Development Director?
No questions, comments. The more that we do these types of examples and we can talk to developers and say, this is what we're looking for in the city, the happier I am. So thank you so much for taking these things on.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Harmont, do you have 5 minutes if you'd like
Yes.
it?
Hi, we were talking about the removal of green spaces. Is there ways, I do have to mirror what the mayor mentioned, liking the flat roofs. I also like the flat roofs. Would there be anywhere in the zoning for rooftop
Yeah.
gardens or rooftop green spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that we could add either as a bonus. So if you provide that amenity, that you get an extra, I don't know exactly what that would look like. Perhaps if we're talking about parking, that we offset a fee for you if you were able to create a vibrant space on your roof. There are a variety of different tools we could use to incentivize that, up to and potentially even requiring some sort of activation of a rooftop. I'd have to talk more with legal and our planner about what that would look like, but I don't see why we couldn't at least encourage it or provide some incentive for developers in the future to provide that amenity to our residents. I know one downtown business has talked about activating their rooftop. It's still very conceptual for them, but it's definitely something I see as kind of a unique way to make Saline stand out compared to our other neighboring communities that are in a similar position, whether that be Dexter, Milan, Chelsea, et cetera.
Yeah. And then I noticed that there was, Henry Street was mentioned, and I know that that tail end is part of maybe a historic district. Are we, in part of the zoning, going to take into effect the historic, like, is there going to be something in there about maintaining historic, the look or the historic standards as far as Henry Street would be concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, again, some of the things that we're looking for here with the pitched roof versus the flat roof, maybe on this more residential end of the downtown. But yes, we could add, we already have some requirements related to the facade, that it has to look a certain way, but I think it's more important and crucial that we're really designing projects that match the neighborhood feel. And we really do have that opportunity through our current site plan review process to ensure that developers are building something that really does feel compatible with the adjacent neighborhood. Maybe perhaps more so than another development that happened on Henry Street not too long ago, to really make it blend aesthetically with the Victorian kind of nature of some of those houses.
And when we're talking about non-motorized accessibility, would part of that be supporting that as well as with these zoning and concepts with sidewalks and accessibility?
Yeah, the sidewalk maintenance, absolutely. I think on Henry Street specifically, because of its grade, even looking at a project, going back to that street parking thing I mentioned in the work meeting, we are very aware of some of the grade challenges with ADA accessibility for the slope, the proper slope amount, but I think those things could be remediated as we work with developers who maybe choose to build on these sites. How are we going to ensure ADA accessibility for sure in front of your building, and then kind of create some sort of plan to make sure that the sidewalks remain accessible in perpetuity. I think any development on some of these sites would improve the overall quality of the sidewalk that's currently there, and perhaps even widen it, although there's some other street considerations. If we widen the sidewalk, then we infringe more on the street, and then we lose parking. So there's plenty of catch-22s there, but I think it's definitely something we can consider and continue to work on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmont. Mr. Harrington, thank you very much. We look forward to having the Planning Commission review these issues further and make some subsequent recommendations or report out to City Council.
And similarly, if you could email me any additional comments you might have looking through these, that would be much appreciated, and I can pass them on to Carlisle Wortman and Associates, who will help us continue to refine these standards.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're going to proceed with the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for discussion.
Mayor, I'd like to remove 24-139.
Okay, 24-139 will now appear as the first item under new business. Is that then a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by CO. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business, which is, we'll begin with agenda item 24-139, Police Chief Contract Renewal. This will be a motion to renew the employment contract with Marlene Radzik through June 30th, 2026.
At this time, I'd like to make a motion to postpone action on this item until our next meeting,
Second.
You need to specify a date certain.
the next meeting date, whichever, if it's August
I believe it's the August 5th.
5th?
Yeah.
August 5th.
Okay, moved by Dylan to postpone consideration until August 5th, 2024 at 7 PM, and that was seconded by Gearbaugh.
Correct.
Okay, would you care to make a comment?
There's just some issues that need to be discussed with the city manager, and she's not available to discuss them.
Okay. Are there questions or comments from anyone on council? Mr. Seal?
Going to have to somehow also adjust the dates in terms of the term and so on in the contract if we postpone.
Correct. There will be, if there are some substantive changes, that's one thing, but there will also need to be some dates and some grammatical corrections made as well. Yep. Councilman Bryce?
We're not running into any legal issues with dates. I'm sorry, I'm lost in the dates conversation. Like the contract extension, like if we don't,
I don't believe so.
okay.
The contract's written that the existing contract will continue in force until such time as a change or termination.
Perfect, thank you for that.
Mr. Seal?
What about the finances? There's a raise in pay in this contract I see, and if we postpone, are we postponing the implementation of that as well, or how does that work?
I mean, yes, in a technical sense, if there's not a motion to approve tonight, that would be an item for consideration on August 5th.
Okay.
If there would be any additional compensation provided retroactively to cover these, it's basically a 3-week period between meetings.
I'd make an appeal for that because, it's our action, it's delaying this
Sure.
implementation.
Yep. Okay. Mr. Gearba?
Just one point, this was supposed to have been brought to us almost 90 days ago, and it's been basically at the last minute, so I'm not sure what caused that hiccup, but we've had this concern prior years, and that's one of the issues tonight.
Any additional discussion? There's a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to postpone. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 24-142, cross-connection control. This will be a motion to approve the contract with Hydro Corp to continue administration of the residential and non-residential cross-connection control program for a 2-year term totaling $56,520. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Gearboss to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Harmount. Director Searles, do you care to make a brief comment for the public record? And maybe if you could just spend about 30 to 60 seconds explaining what the cross-connection control program is and why it is beneficial to utility users throughout the city.
Okay. It was several years ago that across the country that the consequence of a cross-connection was found out. A cross-connection is a back siphonage or backflow from potable water, from non-potable water into potable water. So water goes in the house, it's no longer safe to drink, it goes through a treated boiler, something happens where the pressures are different, that water that can make you sick gets sucked back into the water main. In 76, I'm missing the date. I know I'm missing the date, but a long time ago, the state said that we will not allow cross connections. Our ordinance was changed to adopt the same thing, that we would not allow cross connections. I believe City of Saline has used HydroCorp since 2008 when they were originally Hydro Designs. They've successfully kept us in compliance with all the state mandates. Unique, 3 years ago, we started a residential program. Again, that was the state that said it's time we're going to do that. The residential, if the inspection happens and there's no testable devices, that property goes on a 10-year cycle for now. Of course, they changed the regulations. If there's a testable device, it would be a 5-year inspection. Any high hazard is required to be inspected and certified every year. Some of the common things that our residents will see is a testable device in their irrigation system. If it can be tested, it has to be tested and certified. Another one is, another cross-connection that will exist is if the outlet of the irrigation system is more than 15 inches lower than the highest output of elevated irrigation lines, that would be a cross-connection. Garden hoses, typically, older homes were built with just normal spigot. Today, they have anti-siphon, anti-frost. If they don't have those with our contract, the contractor actually provides up to 4 per house or 3 per house in the contract. Easier to just put them on than not, right? Right now, there's about 820 residents that have never had this yet. So this will be the last year that it will be brand new to people. We'll be doing some more messaging on this that really gets some visuals. A lot of people like to see the visuals of what a backflow is and what the device looks like and what it does to protect the water. But we have very good results. We're in high compliance territory, and it's been successful.
Very good. There are questions or comments for our DPW director, Mr. Gearbaugh, and then Councilmember Rice.
As I think you've received from all of us, our concerns have been about, we've had those communications where people will be either on Facebook or they'll contact us asking about, they don't understand what had happened. And I think that's our whole thing about messaging, and I think you just mentioned whatever we can do to improve that. My one thing has always been, it's the sprinkler systems that seem to confuse everybody. So when that's an issue and they feel like they have to do something else, what is it? Do they have to basically contact somebody to do something, or is it just a different inspection that involves you all?
If there's a testable device, they have to get it tested to say that it's working properly. So that would be calling out a plumbing company. There's a lot of local companies in the area that do a great job. They come out, they certify that it's good, that inspection, that test report comes back into the database, and then they're compliant.
How does that happen? Do they give you an idea of somebody that does it for them, and they contact them, and then we go follow up with them again? How does that whole plan work?
No,
out?
so the whole process, just a quick detail of how the process, let's say you're a resident, you get a notification that there's going to be an inspection. They come out. If there's no devices, the inspection's over, you don't hear anything else. They come out, and there is a device that needs to be certified. It doesn't have a tag saying that it was certified. So then they'll get a notice that says it's in non-compliance. They'll get 3 notices: first notice, second notice, final notice. Then after that, they get a water shutoff. We haven't had that happen, but you get a water shutoff notice. Then if they do get it sampled, if they do get it tested and they contact them and reschedule, none of that happens. They'll get a re-inspection notice, 1, 2, and 3. So there's 10 notices that go out through a whole process versus just one if there's absolutely nothing to inspect. They get, once the device is tested, certified, and it's by an approved tester, it goes in the database. They know in 5 years they have to come back and test that one again, or high hazard is every year.
Okay. What's the cost to do that?
It's $200, $150, $200. I did hear some high numbers. Shop, definitely, that's a 3-quote thing.
So that's not something that we as a city could provide that
No, I'm not
service?
certified.
Not certified, but I mean, if we were to coordinate it, but we don't have that many that occur every year, or?
There's plenty to do. It's just you're above a master plumber at that level.
Okay.
And they're, I don't know, $75 an hour or something like that.
No, that's helpful, because that's
Yeah.
the piece that I think, even I didn't understand, that you had to have somebody come and certify it. I thought it was coordinated with you and the company, but this is now they're involving another third party.
Right, yeah, and that's the state's requirement, that it be certified to a backflow preventer certification.
Yeah, whatever we can do to continue to communicate that and make it more clear, but it sounds like it's working, whatever we're doing right now, if they reach out to you and they get the clarification.
Yeah, and we got a really good campaign coming, a whole toolbox of visuals and educational materials, and we'll be programming them out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Rice?
2 things that happened to me last year. One, we do have a sprinkler system. So the notice that we got, 2 things happened. One, we obviously didn't understand it, which you're working to address. They recommended like one company that they work with. That was a company that was quoting a very high number. So then on Facebook, everybody was like, no, call this person, and that's kind of how we got to be at only $150, because others were quoting for $500.
Okay, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Just so you know, that's not okay. So I'll find out who your inspector was. They're not allowed to, they're not
Yeah, there
allowed
was
to.
like it said in the letter,
There's a,
like
the
we
county has
recommend
a website.
such and such.
The county has all of the certified testers. They're not always accurate. Everyone that's certified in Washtenaw County is on a website, all the counties.
Yeah,
And
if
I'll
you
make
could
sure
provide
that's
that
dis-
website, that's
I'll make sure that's
perfect.
spread out.
Yeah.
But the inspectors are not supposed to make a recommendation.
Mm-hmm. The second thing that happened was it skipped the first, second, third warning. We had like, I don't know, 20 days. I don't even know if it was 20 days. It might have been like 2 weeks.
2 days.
Yeah, it was really,
It was 2
I remember
days.
you and I talked on the phone
Yeah,
about it. And I
was
was
a
like, what's
very-
happening right now?
That
Yes.
hurt. That hurt.
So I talked to City Manager O'Toole about this, and she expressed that everyone will see these communications before they go to residents.
Yeah.
So you all will have seen the days that they put on it, you'll see the timelines, you'll see all of these things before they go to residents,
Yes,
correct?
the company actually had a issue in their printing. All of their customers some of them got them after the date. We had 2 days on ours, which that
Mm-hmm. Okay,
was
yeah, I
not a
didn't
fun
remember the
time.
timeline, but I
Not
remember
a
it
fun
being
time.
real short. So
Oh,
those
by
were
the way,
my,
those weren't accurate. Those dates were totally not accurate.
yeah, and I remember discussing that, and then we put out a message, I remember that. So I think that we're getting ahead of this, and that was one of the reasons why I think a few of us requested that this be pulled out, so that we could just have this conversation, inform the community that this is coming, first of all, and that you all have seen what could possibly happen, and you're working to remedy it this year.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Thank you very much. Are there additional questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. Mr. Searles, my question for you is, I think that they came to my house and I think we had a spigot issue. So does somebody come back to make sure that we've changed out that spigot? Or like, at what point, like, is it a self-reporting thing? I'm not sure how that works.
If you had less than what's in the contract, they threaded one on, marked it down and left. That's one of the services in the contract.
Okay,
So if you had a spigot that was the reason it was non-compliant, they thread one on.
okay.
Yep.
But then, so anyone that's not in compliance right now, you're saying that this company maintains a database that like goes to us so that we know, like, at what point do we follow up with them? I know you're saying about, I just want to make sure that like this doesn't go on in perpetuity. It's
So-
like, at what point will we kind of be done with this process?
Oh, never. This will always go. We're not allowed to stop. So it's a perpetual program.
Okay.
If there's nothing to be tested until the state changes any requirements, as they stand right now, if there's nothing to be tested, they'll be back to residents in 10 years. If there's a testable device, they'll be back to residents in 5 years. If it's a high hazard device, they go annually. Right now in Saline, we only have 46 identified high hazards, and they're actually all on commercial side.
Thank you very much.
Any additional questions or comments
Just
before we
real
vote?
quick, Mr. Searles just mentioned that they're supposed to thread it on it. They don't. They drop it off.
They're leaving it
Yeah,
on the
they're
porch?
just, yeah,
they
they just
don't-
left it
they
on my
don't thread 'em.
porch. That's what I was going to say.
I'll get them some training.
If there's nothing further, no additional discussion, we do have a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Harmont to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Searles. Have a great evening. We move on to new business item 24-143, wastewater treatment rehabilitation project, change order number 1. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Manager O'Toole and to approve or not to approve change order number 1 for the Saline wastewater treatment plant improvement phase 1 in the amount of $2 million, $2,320,361.
Move to acknowledge receipt.
Moved by Gearboss simply to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. Mr. Rubel, Director Briggs, in the city manager's absence, would you care to make some comments this evening?
Start off, Ryan probably has more concrete facts than I have in my head. But,
Sure, you've got some good facts in your head.
well, maybe not pertaining to this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is caused by the material that was found that was excavated, that was sampled for the lagoon closure of the old EQ basin. And it turns out we had some PFAS in the soils around the facility. How they got there, I'm not sure. But it turned out that it turned from the landfill saying we'll only charge you a small amount to dispose of the soil to a fairly large amount to dispose of the soil. And kind of what I've heard is that landfills aren't really highly regulated on what they charge, so they can kind of almost do what they want. But we did have, towards the end of the whole ordeal, we actually had two waste landfills competing for the business. So we got actually a reduced number than the original number. So, Brian, if you want.
Mr. Briggs, the area that was excavated that demonstrated or showed a level of PFAS, for primarily the public's benefit, can you remind us how long that area has essentially been abandoned and not used by staff at the facility?
Well, the area of the lagoon hasn't been used for, it predates me, but probably, yeah, 20, 30 years almost. But, I mean, you could tell that by the growth of trees that were inside the EQ basin. I mean, you had some trees.
Yeah, right.
Pretty good size around. And it wasn't just in the lagoon itself, it was the property out on, out on the level, I guess you'd say, around that area too that had some. And what a lot of people don't realize is that PFAS is very pervasive. And you might be surprised if you tested soils around your house that you might have some, either from some furniture and carpet protectants, or something that you might spray on something to prevent water, some water repellents. Those used to have it in them. Teflon pans. So it's pervasive, and it's just now becoming a point of concern.
Okay.
So
very good. Mr. Rubel, we welcome you here this evening. Are there some additional remarks that you would like to make pertaining to change order number 1?
I'm not sure where to start. Ms. O'Toole included some memos that I thought did a fairly good job of explaining the timeline, and Mr. Briggs explained a few things. A couple other, I'll just sprinkle a couple other facts in then.
Sure.
As Mr. Briggs said, we don't believe this is a wastewater influence. We did sampling throughout the site this spring, and we found these chemicals away from anywhere the wastewater should have ever been. So it's, as Bill said, more ubiquitous than a wastewater influence. And Ms. O'Toole's memo did indicate very low levels, and it's crazy how sensitive, how precise laboratories are these days. We're talking about a few parts per trillion we're measuring. And a trillion, a good rule of thumb analogy is a sugar cube in an Olympic-sized swimming pool is 1 part per billion. So we're detecting levels of a sugar cube in 1,000 Olympic swimming pools. So it's, when she said low level, it is really low. And that's what surprised us in this process is these levels are so low, we did not think the landfills, when we found them, would object to them. And in fact, their regulatory environment's very uncertain right now with how they treat PFAS and the leachate. So they're extremely sensitive to this, and it's really on a case-by-case basis. They're negotiating these fees, and hence we got the landfills to compete with each other to try to get this cost down. It was started at a much higher number, and I'm not happy with where it is, but I'm happier than where we started, put it that way. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions about the timeline. It is fairly well represented in your package.
Yep, appreciate that. Questions for either Mr. Rubel or for Mr. Briggs? Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, thank you very much for mentioning about low levels, because that was actually my question, is that the memo from City Manager O'Toole said low levels. Some of the Tetra Tech memos said high level, but nothing ever gave a number, and so I wasn't sure whether those were comparisons.
Yeah, there was a single, that got this started, was a single spot by the lagoon that was higher. It was in the dozens of parts per trillion. When we measured around the other parts of the plant, we were in the single digits parts per trillion. So that, I mean, they're measuring to a fraction of a part per trillion, the labs, and that's what the landfills got all crazy about, so.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Now, just for reference, has the soil now been moved off-site?
As of right now, I think 60 or 70% of the soil needed to be removed for the project has been removed. They are proceeding now with the heart of the project, which was a problem this spring. So there will be more trucking, more excavation, more trucking later on in the project, but they are now proceeding as they hoped.
At an additional cost, or have we paid that fee up front now with included in this?
There will be another cost coming. They have not submitted it yet, and it will only be for the double handling. In other words, they excavated the soil and stockpiled it because we were waiting on this landfill result. So they did incur a little bit more cost than to scoop it up a second time. And of course, the trucking to take it out was part of the base bid. So it's just that cost to scoop it a second time. We are waiting on that cost.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Councilmember Rice.
Is there any help from the state for any communities that are running into this? I know that that's a question that is more rhetorical.
Obviously, we believe this is a project cost that the loan will be eligible for. The only funding source I'm aware of would be on the county level, the greenfield, brownfield costs, excuse me. I do not believe, I think we did make some calls about that, and I think Colleen might even sit on the brownfield committee.
She does.
It did not look promising at that point.
She mentioned there's a lot of rigmarole because of where we're getting already the funding versus getting it from the county, and I think even
Okay.
Ms. Cole is involved in
Yeah.
that a little bit, so.
One part about the cost I probably neglected to mention is this is a unit cost. So the landfill is charged by ton. So the city will only incur the cost that actually hits the scales that enters the landfill. So the first 60% was actually quite a bit under our target density. This cost assumes a very heavy soil. We wanted to be conservative. The good news is the first batch was much lighter less dense than we assumed. So it's still going to be a big number, but I think it's going to be a less offensive big number. So.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So the portion of the soil that needed to be removed that had the PFAS, there was no, like, we couldn't move, maybe shift it, it had to be removed?
Quite a bit of the soil will be reused on site. This is strictly the amount that could not be reused. So you will see a big pile of soil there, and that is because it will be used for a different part of the project.
Okay. And I know this was, we went from not having, the assumption for the original cost with the $10 per ton was the assumption of no PFAS, which we do have. Some locations, are known to have the PFAS in the city. So, so then my understanding is the shift from the $10 to the $47 per ton, that PFAS soil was competitive bid to the landfills?
The contractor had two landfills actively competing with each other. The number came down almost every day for a week. And they eventually got to a point where they said, okay, best and final offer tomorrow. So it was a higher number to start with.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just to clarify, are there only certain landfills that would accept this, and that's who they were working with, or?
No, this is a regular landfill type. Is it 1 or 3? I always forget the number. It's a municipal waste landfill is taking it. I think they actually were in conversations with 3 at one time, but they only got firm numbers from 2. And at some point, it became cost prohibitive to truck it farther.
Right.
So hence, they had a radius of 30 or 40 miles they were working with.
And because Ms. Harmon had asked that question, I figured that was part of it, because I know we've been talking about this. When you mentioned, and just because it's PFAS, we reuse it on the soil, what do we have to worry about in the future? With
Well,
Eagle?
this
Is Eagle
site-
saying it's okay because of what they can approve?
this should not be hazardous to the staff working there. It's not volatile. It stays within the soil. This site, actually going back to the original planning we did for this site, we found towards the southern end some chemicals we think came from off-site. And so that site, it will always be classified as, the word is facility in the law. So any soil from that site that's removed has to be landfilled. So that won't change. That was actually there for different chemicals, so.
But if we're moving it around, that's my only question. If we're moving around, when you uncap stuff like that, but you're saying that it's so minimum that Eagle's saying it's okay to
You can
move
keep
it on
it,
the
you can
site.
keep it on the site. It's not volatile, it's not hazardous to breathe in or anything like that. If you were to eat the soil, that'd be a different scenario, but,
But if we spread around, then will we be capping it to some degree, or?
no, you don't need to do that.
Okay.
It's,
No, it just, because I know
apparently
that
it's
always.
throughout the site, so whether it's there, whatever corner it is, it
We
isn't
had-
any different than we
yeah.
started.
We've had previous concerns about the ADM property across the street, so now we have the dump that used to be there on that property, and that's probably what's contributed to some of this. It's just making sure what we're doing now, because we don't know what the state's going to do, just as they're charging us 4 times the rate to take it, what could happen. But if we're getting Eagles okay and whatever, and we've got it, 'cause I don't trust Eagle for sometimes, but as long as we've got that aspect, then I'm glad that we
Yeah,
can move forward.
we're compliant by letting it stay on site.
Any final questions before we vote on the motion to acknowledge receipt? Quickly, Councilmember Rice?
And with that, there's no reason it should end up back in treated waters that then go into the river.
No, all the wastewater is contained within pipes and concrete, and mixing should not be a concern.
Okay, thanks.
We have a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon, simply to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes having the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to approve or not to approve change order number 1?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by CO, seconded by Gearboss. Mr. Briggs, Mr. Rubel, thank you again. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? There appears to be none. All those in favor of approving, say aye. 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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of tonight's agenda. First up are reports, commission committee updates, and other announcements. Mr. Lesh, do you have any?
I just want to make sure all the public is invited to Jazz in the Park this Saturday, 2 p.m. at Mill Pond Park,
And when does that event conclude, Mr. Lesh?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. So 2 to 8 at Mill Pond Park. Very good. Mr. CO, any community updates or board and commission reports?
Yes, Your Honor. Because the summertime is flying by, I just wanted to announce that on Saturday, August the 3rd at 2 p.m., we're going to have our annual Celine Lindenberg picnic. Any and all are welcome to attend. Of course, if you do attend, the cost of admission is to bring a dish to pass. Bratwurst will be furnished by the organization.
What was the date on that again, Jack?
August 3rd.
August 3rd. And please, if you intend to come, please call Mr. Jim Roth and RSVP to him that you will be there so we know how much food to bring.
And the address can be provided. It's actually, the hosts live in either just within the village of Manchester or in the township.
Outside.
Yeah.
In the township.
In the township. So it's Manchester Township, but the address can be provided if you're interested in attending.
Correct.
Anything else, Mr. CO?
No, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, any reports, announcements, committee updates?
Just very quickly, before this meeting tonight, the policy committee met, and we reviewed 3 potential ordinances. There should be 2 coming forward to this body, probably at our next meeting. Mr. Harrington was left to confirm that, but probably at our next meeting regarding PUDs and, oh my gosh, it's been an awful lot of paper tonight, sorry.
On-site events and,
There was PUDs, there was on-site, and then there was
Yeah, I'm not the only one, I think.
material changes.
Oh, yes, that's what it is. My apologies. It's material building changes. Changes to building materials.
Very good. Mr. Gearbow, reports or other announcements?
I just want to bring up to speed, we had a charter town hall last Monday to discuss the changes, potential changes to the charter. That video is up online on our website if you'd like to see that. There's also information available on the website. I also want to thank the community for the turnout that we had at the Depot event celebrating the 4th of July last Saturday. we had a good number. A lot of individuals enjoyed riding on the Velocipede, which goes up and down the track. And we're also looking forward to our next event. That'll be the second weekend of August, similar as Summerfest, is the annual yard sale. It's a large fundraiser for us, and we encourage the community to come out, and we still have booths available that could be rented. So look forward to see you there.
Very good. Councilmember Rice, reports, announcements, or updates from any boards or committees?
Nothing for me.
Councilmember Harmount?
Yes, the Historic District Commission met on July 11th to review an exterior improvements for North Ann Arbor Street, and wanted to say those were approved.
Very good. And Mr. Harrington has left, as was noted by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, but as you recall, I think it was a few meetings back, I inquired as to the status of the former UAW property at Woodland and Maple. Mr. Harrington has followed up. Some of the code compliance issues should be dealt with in the very near future, and he was notified by the property owner that construction activity, a pretty comprehensive rehabilitation and remodel should commence sometime during the month of August. So I'll make sure to provide additional updates or have them disseminated through Mr. Harrington's office. Moving on to the final discussion item of the evening, was immediately subsequent to our last council meeting that Councilmember Harmount and I had a brief discussion, and she requested that council chamber security be added as a discussion item, so I will yield the floor to her.
Yes, in light of the recent activities that we've seen in the politics, I think it's more important to discuss active shooter type of training and safety measures to be reviewed with the city manager.
Very good. I know that the city manager is aware of your concerns. I also had a brief conversation pertaining to this issue with the police chief, Chief Radzik, earlier today. Chief Radzik, is there anything you'd like to add pertaining to the subject? And I guess you don't have a microphone at the table, so I'd ask that you come forward to the lectern.
I don't really have anything more to add other than just, I don't really want to talk about security measures at a public meeting, but we can offer some training and maybe have some conversations about some other safety measures during these meetings.
Very good. And I think you had indicated that you would chat with the city manager subsequent to her, subsequent to her getting back from vacation, and maybe put some thoughts and recommendations, ideas in writing, and then disseminate that to city council staff.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Anything else you'd like to add, Councilmember Harmount?
No, thank you for the consideration.
Any additional comments, Councilmember Rice?
I have had this conversation with both the chief and with city manager, and I do feel like there are some ideas out there. So I'm confident that we will move in the right direction, but I appreciate that you've heard our concerns and that we will move forward.
Okay.
Very good. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just, we've already started considerations for emergency exits, and some of that already has been assessed. So looking forward to what's happening on that, but I think DPW has taken lead on that. And whatever you can do in terms of the other aspect, I will appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
If there are no additional discussion items, we come to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but of course not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments from those in the audience this evening? Clerk Royal, I would defer to you. Were there any written comments provided in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? Easy enough. Then if there's nothing further to be brought before City Council this evening, the chair would be delighted to entertain a motion to adjourn at 7:58.
So moved.
Moved by Lesh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
All right, see you.